Hi everyone, today I want to talk to you about a sight reading and ear training program that I like to use with my students called 4-Star Sight Reading. So this program kind of goes along with Royal Conservatory, which I also love to use with my students. It's an exam program centered in Canada. It's just a really great program. But whether or not my students participate in that, I really do like them to work on their sight reading and their ear training. So these are the 4-star books. I know Royal Conservatory now has a subscription program, which is excellent. So if students want to practice on their own or if they want to learn that way, they can. But I'm old school and I love to do the 4-star books. So they have a book that corresponds with each level, and I wanted to demonstrate for you how to help your students with level 5. So level 5 is in the middle, kind of a good one to use. So there are all these different components to the exam. So the first component is the rhythm reading. So in levels prep through 4, the rhythm reading is separate. But in level 5, they combine it. So in the sight reading example, they have like a little line that's boxed that the student will clap. So it's nice because the student actually gets to look at their sight reading a little longer than the other one, since it is more difficult being in level 5. And one thing that they will require, even for all the other levels, is that you tap your foot for one full measure before you begin clapping. So I just wanted to show you how you would practically do this. So I'm looking at our level 5 4-star book that I have here. And the first example is in 3-4 times. So I know you can't see my foot, but I'm gonna tap my foot 3 times, and then I'm gonna go ahead and clap that example while I continue tapping my foot as the metronome. So 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, and 1, 2, 3. So it's not necessary for the students to say the counts out loud. I just like to do that when I'm demonstrating so that it's really clear, since you might not have that 4-star book sitting right in front of you. Another acceptable way, instead of tapping the foot, Royal Conservatory will allow you to tap the rhythm with one hand and then have the other hand kind of be like what my foot is, so like the metronome tapping the beat. I prefer the foot. It's just less confusing for me to have the foot kind of doing its own thing and then the hands doing the rhythm. That's just me, but do whatever you feel comfortable with your students, since both are acceptable for Royal Conservatory. And then for the sight reading, they get about 20 to 30 seconds to study that example. So I would always coach the student to look at the clefs, look at the key signatures, figure out your starting notes. You're allowed to ghost play, or like kind of like play a little bit on the piano, but you just can't like press down while you're studying. And then when the allocated time is up, you can play. One kind of catch to it is if you're doing a remote exam, they do give you the sight reading 22 hours before your exam. So you are allowed to practice that, which isn't exactly sight reading, but that's just how they've approached the remote exam situation. So this advice that I'm giving would be for students doing the live in-person exam. So the next thing I want to look at is the ear training, which is super fun. So the intervals for level 5 are major third, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major or minor sixth, and perfect eighth. So it's very important to coach your students to say the quality and the number. So the size and the quality. So example, perfect eighth, a lot of students are tempted to say octave, but if they say that, they don't get any points. So they have to say perfect eighth. I think I saw that in a training video they released like during COVID times when they were doing online exams. They had a lot of resources that they released that year. So I think that was a little tidbit I picked up and just like stored in my brain, because I want to help my students do the best that they can do. So in terms of teaching intervals, I like to use different like songs or ways to remember that. So like a third, it's like a doorbell, right? Or fourth, like Here Comes the Bride. Or fifth could be Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Just little ways to help your students remember. For my students who have done the Celebrate Piano series, that series has all these interval safari songs. So they already know all of them. So like Busy Bee song is seconds. So they have these memorized. So all my little students who started with that and then fed into Royal Conservatory have like a rich database of the intervals already stored in their mind, because that's a very foundational part of that curriculum, which is great. So then they have the chord identification part of the exam. So for the chord identification for level 5, after you do the review stuff, is identifying a major triad, minor triad, or dominant seventh chord. Great things for your students to understand, even if they don't do Royal Conservatory, just to have that understanding where they can hear and identify what a chord is. And then they have the chord progression part of the exam. So for this level, they only have two choices. So they have pretty good chances, even if it's hard for them. So they have a 1-4-1 progression or a 1-5-1. So I always coach my students to listen to the left hand. So 1-4-1, we have a perfect fourth. 1-5-1, perfect fifth. I tell my students, don't listen to the right hand, because the right hand could be any sort of octave, could be any sort of inversion of the triad, so don't get distracted by that, but listen to the left hand. Could also be. So listening to that left hand will help them decipher. Now this is a 1-5-1, which interval they're hearing. So that's a great exercise because it gets a lot more complex as you approach each level. Going into level 10, all the chord progressions become much more complex. And then my students' favorite part of the exam, which they beg to do, their practice tests, is the clapback and playback. So for this one, the clapback and playback is combined. So in levels preparatory through 4, they have separate clapbacks and playbacks, but in this one they combine it so the student gets to hear it more. So as the teacher, you're going to play this a total of 3 times. Before you play it, you will tell them the key, the meter, and you're gonna tap or give them like your tempo, so you count off a full measure. You play it 2 times, they clap it once, you play it again, and then they play it back. So I'm gonna do an example for you. All right, so this one is in 4/4 time. It's also in the key of E major, and my tempo is 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is again. Then your student would clap it. Then you would play it again, and then your student would play it. So these are just some really great examples of how you can use 4-star sight reading to prepare your students for Royal Conservatory tests, or just to help them improve on their sight reading and ear training skills, to help them be the most well-rounded musicians that they can be. So I hope you find this helpful, and I hope you enjoy using 4-star.